Well, a very pleasant good morning to members of the Small Business Association, to our colleagues and friends. Welcome to this, our monthly information session, a part of our webinar series, where we have again another very interesting topic that we want to distill, a topic that will no doubt affect the small business community here in Barbados. We're very pleased to have you join us for the next hour as we hear from our expert, Mr. Jeremy Stephen, on this issue of really making some sense of this electricity rate increase, as we've dubbed it, the dollars and cents of this rate increase. As we all know, the FTC would have recently approved an increase for the Barbados Light and Power Company Limited, and therefore we want, during our session today, to understand what really are the implications of this increase for the small business community and for the business sector at large. Now, before we get into our session today, just let me share a few housekeeping matters with you, if I may. This is a part of our webinar series. Every month, you can look forward to another engaging session hosted by us here at the SBA, primarily to help our constituents, help our members understand what is happening in the environment around them, the issues that will impact on the overall operations of small entities, small businesses. At the end of this session, we're going to ask you to spare another 5 to 7 minutes with us as you share your views, your thoughts in our evaluation tool. At the end of it, we'll place a link in the chat, and we're asking you to please give us your feedback on today's session. Now, throughout the presentation, we will invite you to take your notes, jot down your thoughts, and be prepared after the presentation to engage us in a question and answer segment. And we will invite you then to post your questions in the chat section of our online platform here today. And these questions will be reviewed by our presenter, and the solutions, answers, responses there will come after that. So again, please remember that throughout the session, your mics must be muted. And after that, we will invite you to drop your thoughts, drop your questions if you have any in the chat segment of this platform. Now, colleagues, I'm sure you will agree with me that we are in a very challenging economic environment. We had the annual budget presentation by the Minister of Finance here just 2 days ago. And I will admit to you that I was really hoping for some reprieve from the high level of taxation that we are currently experiencing. And to boot, there was none. And we recognize now that in addition to the sewage levy, the 2% foreign exchange tax on our online transactions, the continued increase at the pump for those who obviously have to purchase fuel for their vehicles, and the list goes on, that we now will be faced with an increase in electricity rates. So it is a very challenging environment. Your association, however, is here to assist as much as we can, to educate, to lobby on your behalf, to help with capacity building measures for us to try to get through this very challenging environment that we are confronted with at this time. And so today, to help us with this particular topic, as I said, is Mr. Jeremy Stephen, a friend of the SBA. He would have been with us during 2022 and our webinar series then, as we looked at the issue of cybersecurity and the impact of going digital for the small firm. He's here to discuss now the dollars and cents of the electricity rate increase. A little bit about him. Mr. Jeremy Stephen is a well-known economist with extensive experience in finance and technology academia, venture capital, private equity, and PIPE finance here in Barbados, the Eastern Caribbean, and internationally. His core specializations are in financial and economic analysis, as well as modeling and web development. Financial training, along with internal corporate advisory services and management of both internal and external financial monitoring systems. He's currently an economic consultant at the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. He's a chief examiner for financial services studies at the Caribbean Examinations Council and has been a member of the UNDP's Small Grants Program Steering Committee for the past 10 years. His other interests include software programming, technology and engineering, as well as most recently, aviation entrepreneurship. So without any further ado, colleagues, let us welcome Mr. Jeremy Stephen to share his thoughts and his perspectives on our topic today in our monthly webinar series, the dollars and cents of the electricity rate increase. Jeremy, over to you.
Hey, good morning, guys. How are you all? Everybody can see me well?
Yes, we can see you well. Thanks.
Perfect. This is a very interesting topic, and I wanted to thank the Small Business Association for trusting me with it. It is probably one of the more scandalous topics I've had to cover, especially since making my departure from UE, last being to deal with marijuana, interestingly. But
good morning.
I don't know what else to tell you guys. Let me put it this way. There's at least one surprise, no pun intended for those that knew me in secondary school, one surprise that we are going to have today. And it's going to come at the very end. But the fact remains, it's an inconvenient timing, but the noise out there, especially that caused by Emira, and my presentation looks at a lot of their own filings and presentations and being able to demystify that for you. I'll say up front, however, that the proof remains in the pudding because there's one aspect that they would have forgotten. The information out there that's presented by Emira, and I'll move into the presentation in a bit, it says very upfront, this is how much we are going to be costing you. Let that be very clear. That's what Emira's concern is about. This is what, it's going to cost you as a small business person, as a consumer. But it does not really take into consideration the other joint impacts or the high correlations that come with energy. And we are going to discover this, or at least discuss this today. So the agenda is very simple. I'm not here to explain the legalities of the decision. I'm not here to discuss why Trisha Watson and David Simpson should be national heroes for putting up a fight. I'm not here to even discuss where the language is concerned, because there was a lot of discrepancies when it comes to language. I'm here to, however, discuss what those guys were thinking, Emira, that being, through the Barbados Light and Power, and then look at the general impact on the economy. That's all my presentation is going to be. And from your questions, depending on what type of business that you have, we'll be able then to tailor my answers in a sense. But let's start with why Emira wanted to adjust this rate. You have to understand this just so you can challenge it better. And a lot of these are actually very, if you really follow the I don't want to say diatribe, but follow the discussion that was had, a lot of these are very contrite rationales or contrite reasons. You know, they wanted to at least quell, they said borrow, but they wanted to quell the amount of money that they've been borrowing to fund their operations. And they had issues pertaining to cash flow. That's number 2 and number 3. Number 3 is probably the biggest concern, because as we all witnessed some years back, a monkey allegedly damaged some equipment. And then we had a major shutdown as well in the island, right? I guess you all will remember that very embarrassing moment in Light & Power's history. But truth be told, it does challenge the state of the equipment. You know, they wanted to ensure that they could, as a result of maintaining plant, ensure the reliability and resilience of the network. And then they wanted this, and I was, as soon as you guys put up the ads, I had little calls, you know, these phantom calls people talk about, where you get these calls from special people. They had a special call which said to me, you know, make sure the public of Barbados through the SBA members that this is only the second time we've actually asked for a rate adjustment. Filed over the past 40 years. Even though it would have taken some time for that rate adjustment to be granted, this second one, you know, there's only been twice. Now, for me, that does not matter, because like bills shift according to other changes, like the energy surcharge, for instance. But even though the base rate, if I want to talk to it as a base rate, is being applied to for shifting, one must always remember that the energy surcharges are very much flexible within some limits, but flexible, and are very much tied to the price of gas. So as fuel prices go up, if Putin decides that he must totally decimate Ukraine, the numbers that I present to you today will be a bare minimum increase. Put that in your mind. There are increases, but these are bare minimums. Expect that with the energy surcharges, that those have always been adjusted. So what, again, you've been seeing over the past 10 to 13 years has been shifts in the cost of energy, and as a result, your energy surcharge would have changed as opposed to your base rate. That has been adjusted. And even with the energy surcharge, I guess what they've been saying is that that has not helped in terms of ensuring their profitability. David Simpson and Tricia Watson would have easily dispelled a lot of that, where their concerns were that, you know, the money that was there from the beginning, that it was being taken out as part of a dividend. That's public knowledge, a massive dividend for the shareholders, and not necessarily reinvested back into equipment. Emira argues they're a profit-making enterprise and not a government institution. So the proposed rate increase or revenue increase in their own terms, I grabbed all of this from their sources so I could keep my tail clean while making comments. As far as they're concerned, just short of $47 million more they're going to make. And as a result, the rate increase that they're proposing is just a measly 11.9% according to them. What they currently collect right now is just short of $1 billion, 825 million. The rest of it isn't that important unless you like finance, except for the rate of return. In other words, from this rate adjustment, one should expect that Light & Power would be returning to its shareholders some 12.5%. And if you like the WACC model, weighted average cost of capital model, it simply means that on average, they should be returning to both shareholders and who they owe money to, their creditors, 8.79%. What does that mean for you? It seems like a nice number compared to what you pay if you had a mortgage from 2005, 2006, or even before. Your mortgage rates is just around 6%. So in other words, their rate of returns is similar to what a bank would be making off of you for a mortgage, right? And before it was less, because it's apparently 3.31% was the current rate of return. In other words, on average, what's paid to Emira, according to their own numbers, and on average, what is paid to the people they borrow from, the banks, Bank of Nova Scotia, whomever would be their main creditors, it could even be government in some cases, the average return was 3.31. And they said that return was not enough to not adequately set aside capital to fund their business and continue improving on their infrastructure to meet customer demands. And it, again, in my background, finance background, 3.31 is a measly return, especially for a utility, right? But I'm not defending at this point, I haven't provided any evidence to really defend the increase from 3.31% to 8.79% in return on investment, in return on both equity and capital, the average return that is. So what is important, however, is that this should raise expenditure in society by 46.4%, sorry, by $46.4 million or 0.5%. Here's the catch. I want people to understand why I picked this part out based on those numbers that we had so far, before I even gone into sample bills and all of that beautiful stuff. It fundamentally is this. We all hear economists talk about GDP, gross domestic product, and most people have a general idea that it's the value, total value of goods and services provided in a country within a specific time frame. And there are three measures by which one will calculate GDP. One of the more difficult measures is via what you call the expenditure method. The expenditure method, the way an economist should take it is to say, well, hey, this is the amount of money that's being spent in society. There's the other two look at income, and also you break it down by components, GDP by components, right? Basically those three methods. And the overall thinking has always been, what is spent is what is earned. Except if you're a bank with fractional reserve lending, where they create loans out of thin air. What is spent is what is earned. So therefore, if spending is going to increase by 0.5% of GDP, I should have put, or sorry, not 0.5% of GDP, 0.5%. One would expect that we'd be spending more, and as a result, more money is going to be in circulation through the Emira Caribbean. But what it generally says is that somehow this increase in GDP, especially with small open economies like ours, can lead to some form of inflation to begin with. If it was insignificant, this 46, if it was less revenue that they were looking at taking in, therefore the average cost to each person paying, each company paying would be less, you would expect that less companies, or fewer companies, sorry, would want to actually carry forward or put through that cost adjustment in their bills. So already, Michael's drawing, already I could see from these very simple numbers that, there's going to be some form of a feed through in terms of prices by the business community already. As simple as and as dirty as an analysis this is, I could already tell you the cost adjustment is coming, right? But now we can get into the simple bills. All of this is taken from their information. My goal today is to break this down as simply as I can for everybody. Again, these are not my numbers. I didn't have to go through any bit of analysis that would be off. Emira would have done this, and this is the numbers I would have gotten, all right, as a result. So take it from this, that there are at least 7 different types of customer streams. We've got the domestic service, which would be the yous and I sitting at home right now, bumming off our current to watch this hopefully helpful presentation. And then employees obviously would get some benefit or reduced rate on what they pay. Nothing unfamiliar, nothing unfair in that sense. You've got general service, that would be more so the smaller types of businesses, small types of services, large power users, like the, let's see, the banks, the larger manufacturers, I should say, the banks bureaus that we would call. Banks bureaus, for example, anyone that adds significant load onto the grid, regardless of if it's partly made by the clean energy bridge. In other words, you're putting energy into the grid, or if you're just taking from the grid altogether. And then you've got secondary voltage power. And my favorite out of all of them, time of use, that's when you're renting for special events. And so like hard ports and all that stuff. around the country, and then street lights, which Light and Power, I used to think made money off of it, but according to them, they made no money based on the realized rate of returns that they had. They lose money as a social service as far as they're concerned. But what matters to you all? Numbers 2 to probably numbers 5, really, which is around a total of just over $450 million that currently the Light and Power earns from the business sector, the small business sector in particular, and our households across the country. What is important is to notice that most of its return, let me see if we can have a pointer here, just to help everybody, spotlight. Should be able to see my spotlight. So the rates of return, don't look at overall for now. Look at these. You would see that in terms of their return, what they banked their money on, necessarily wasn't even their employees or even us, the smaller people, but rather the business community. The business community are charged a premium to begin with. This is on the base rate, okay? So they want to, and they recognize that they make more money off of the business community and those that would be using or renting for special events or time of use as well. And as a result, they wanted to adjust their rates on average by about 6% up on the business community. This is the important thing. So basically, the rate adjustment increase is going to be shouldered by the business community out there, not us as householders, but the business community. In fact, the rate adjustment on households is actually fairly small, right? So, and as a result, you would expect that moving from about, what was it again, 7 million in terms of us as householders, we're going to pay around 23 million or so. But the business community as a whole is going to cover a significantly larger portion of that, almost double, all right? Now, currently, they're saying, however, their biggest losses are on consumers alone. But cumulatively, in terms of business community, is almost not double, just short of double, about 75% more in losses. And therefore, just to state that again, the business community is shouldering the brunt of this adjustment that they were proposing from the beginning. Okay. Now, let me move on. There we go. So how would your bill look to you if you were a customer? Well, let's stick to the facts, where it came to the business community. Let's stick to general service, secondary voltage power, and large power users. And as you would see, large power users, general service, and secondary voltage, the current charge, the base rate is higher than you would have for the domestic households. And it's really just a $3 adjustment for domestic households on the base rate. But when it comes to the general service, I don't have to tell you guys anything. Look at the math behind it, look at the numbers. These adjustments are very large. If you're a large power user or you fit into that category, I imagine in the SBA, none of you will, you're paying definitely around $1,200 more accordingly, all right? And on your base rate. If you're a secondary voltage power user, you're definitely paying around, that's approximately 4.8. That's 8 times more in your base rate. And if you're a general service, which I imagine the majority of SBA members are, you're paying just an adjustment before. Definitely a little more of an increase on the base rate than it would be for you in your households. But the energy charges, they're making slight adjustments in terms of cents on the energy charges per hour. But as I told you, those charges tend to fluctuate according to the price of oil, right? They can, because that's supposed to be a pass-through. In terms of explaining your bills, I don't know how many people explain bills before, but it's broken down into these 3 basic charges for a specific reason. One of them is made purely for profit. Another is made somewhat for profit, and then the energy charge is made to ensure that they cover costs. So customer charges, there's some profit there, but not too much. The demand charges is where they make a lot of money, and as a result, that's why large power users pay a demand charge, and their demand charge increases small compared to their customer charges. Seems like it implies that the large power users are slightly unreliable in terms of demand going over and beyond what their base usage should be. The secondary voltage power users as well, that's just a $4.80 increase, roughly about what, that's 20%, roughly a 20% increase, if so much, 25% increase in that part. And on the time of use, if any of you have to throw a party or something somewhere, you're paying just about what, $4.90 more. So that equates to about a 40% increase. Thereabouts, not 40, half of 9. So about 25 to 30% increase. Just quick math in my head. But again, they make profits. Like that's purely profit. Demand charges probably 90% profit according to their finances. And again, the energy charge is just so that they can make costs, so that they can cover the shifts in energy. In terms of if we were to look at a typical current monthly bill, for those that do general service, you're expecting, or according to Light & Power, to pay a $250, well, you normally would have been paying $252 on average, some higher, some low. Your bill is going to go up by $16. If you're a large power user, you typically pay around 42 grand. Your bill should be going up around $4,000. The time of use persons, 89,000. Again, the special usage, you're paying by time. Your bill's going up on average with $3,000. Street lights, government is actually saving $4 on street lights every month, roughly. But again, it was a $4 reduction, so they're definitely making no money on government or this one. And to Lynette's point, no ease in taxes, but definitely they're getting the ease in their light bills in terms of the street lights. So the general service, again, I want you to understand something. If you're small household like business, or you're just operating with very few people in a house-like environment, your bills are going to be going up compared to where you're living in your own domestic needs. It's a much larger increase, even though you were paying a larger bill before. Okay. Now, this is prior. Let me say this. These assume that none of these customer classes are feeding any energy into the bridge, into the clean energy bridge. You're not feeding anything into the grid. Somebody had a question. All right, so Dario was correcting me. He was saying that the time of use charge doesn't have anything to do with holding events or anything like that. And he's saying that the energy charge has nothing to do with the change in oil prices. All right, that's fine. I stand as corrected. The main thing I wanted to get across, however, stand as corrected, is the whole point that the energy charges are separate from the base charge and the other one. So thank you for that correction. Now, of course, if you're part of the clean energy bridge, it's expected that you're going to significantly mitigate the proposed increase. And again, it means then that the Small Business Association should really look at putting up money, or sorry, members in the Small Business Association should start to consider probably their choices of taking advantage of the clean energy bridge if the investment makes sense. As it stands, these are the charges without the clean energy bridge and with the clean energy bridge. Again, to really put it on average, let's say this is for secondary voltage customers, power customers. Overall, when you equate the demand charges, the energy charges, and the fuel charge, and it's a fuel charge I meant, I apologize, Dario, that is what it was. And the fuel charges, you're going to have on average a 2% increase in your bill if you're not on the clean energy bridge. With the clean energy bridge, you're expecting that your overall costs, again, if you have the amount of investment to join or to be a sufficient part of the clean energy bridge, a 10% decrease. Okay, so your bills are going to drop. So the secondary voltage power, in terms of this example, last July, you're looking at $169,000, say, for this particular customer, 169, almost $170,000. Without the clean energy bridge, your bill's going up to 172K. And with the feed-in tariff, right? And with the clean energy bridge, the bill should drop to 152. So now what's being said on a bit of correction, the clean energy bridge is the plant, that's not the feed-in tariff. So the feed-in tariff is what I was referring to, but the clean energy bridge is what is the program that has to do with the plant that was commissioned. Thank you, Derek. Just to be on the clear side. You should, when that comes about, you're expecting that the bill should drop for secondary voltage customers. This one is actually for large power. The title is a little misleading on my part there, I apologize. But the main thing that I want to be very clear on here again is that with the clean energy bridge, you're expecting a drop in charges as well. But if you're not, if the clean energy bridge is not around, you're not getting that reduction you're expecting as a large power consumer, that you get a 5% increase. Okay, so long and short is that even though you've got these adjustments, whilst there's the clean energy bridge, you should be, for larger customers especially, expecting a little more of a containment with your energy bills. So moving on into the economic and social background of this, and where I see concern. So, you know, there's a whole idea of the clean energy bridge coming. There should be some containment of costs. It's a matter of time. But I want to focus on the clean energy bridge not being around at this point. And the fact remains is, without information, without the idea that there could be some form of a cost containment, especially with the clean energy bridge being around, the past 10 years have been marred by tepid economic growth. In other words, wages, real wages have not grown in line with inflation. Long-term inflation in Barbados typically is 6% per annum. But of course, during COVID, depending on who you believe, I like to go with the Barbados Statistical Service on this one. Inflation skyrocketed into double figures, while unemployment skyrocketed as well into double figures, especially in the basket of goods, which most people are very self-aware of. That's food prices, right? Food prices. Now, something else to consider before we move on is the fact that 87% of the Barbados economy is driven by spending. In other words, if there be any reason to cut consumer spending, there's two ways to think of it. If there be any reason to cut consumer spending, then you are looking at, what is it again? Right. Any reason to cut consumer spending, it has significant impacts for industry, which also means on the flip side that a price increase generally in key areas and key inputs, let's say energy, fuel at the pump, and also electric costs, could also lead to customers having to just dip in a bit more. Let me explain that even further. About 5 to 10 years ago, 80% of the Barbados economy was driven by consumer spending, and the remainder was driven by both public and private investment. The public sector had reduced for some time being their form of investment, that is driving projects and also supporting the general economy. The private sector obviously battened down the hatches, especially as we were in the COVID period. And as a result, customers were expected to pick up the slack by about 7%. 7% of the economy is an $8 billion economy, so $800 million is 10%. So you're seeing just around between 600 to 700 million dollars more consumers had to contribute by way of expenditure towards GDP. In other words, without a wage increase, without a general growth in the economy, as a result of that wage increase, customers are being tapped out in general in all areas. I don't even have to look at your bills, monthly bills, to know that the last 5 to 7 years, especially. I'm not blaming party, but this is just the environment. Customers have had to dig into their pockets even more by the tune of $600 million more. That is the facts. Customers and businesses have had to spend more, right? Of course, most of that expenditure, believe it or not, is not necessarily with businesses. It's actually split quite evenly from the numbers. And the primary expenditure would obviously have been pertaining to tourism, retail, finance, and international business. A lot of people don't realize that wholesale and retail on its own is larger than tourism. But mind this point, tourism as a business has a lot more interconnections by way of the foreign exchange that it brings into the country to help finance our own expenditure and imports, right? I want you to bear that in mind as we go forward, because the analysis that Emira had put out, I found, was leaving out a key aspect, especially where they were talking about the impacts on the wider economy. Essentially, these numbers are the GDP growth rates. Let's just look at what drives growth. And that helps me then to build a compelling case a bit later on, like the next 2 minutes or so. Essentially, what was driving growth for the last 10 years in our country, do not look at the numbers in their own facts, because mining and quarrying as an industry is less than 4% of GDP. But if you have to look at the large players I identified, tourism typically is in accommodation and food services. You can see that that was driving growth in Barbados. So let's look at 2019, 5% tourism grew, tourism and food services. So hotels and restaurants essentially grew by 5%, 5.45 that year. And on its own is responsible for just around 20% of the economy. So that 5% would obviously have a significant impact, yeah? And compared to mining and quarrying, 17%, but only is responsible for 4% of the economy. So yes, it grew a lot, but it did not impact a lot of people in terms of growth. But you would see for most of them, business services had a tepid time leading into COVID to begin with, but coming out of COVID, just very, very cusp of it, grew the most, especially by its size, which is around 16 to 17%. And transport, wholesale and retail, as you would have seen, was tepid as well, has some periods where it definitely was not performing, but coming out of COVID, it was strong as well. And public health in its own is small, but was really, really good in terms of activity. And that comes down to the support that the government was able to drive for the COVID program. I wanted to put that in context. Finance was also struggling in terms of its performance. Generally, Barbados on average was struggling. If we move ahead, these are basically inflation rates by sector. Again, I want you to pay attention to weights. Weights basically say how large as a whole in the economy is this specific sector, or rather, how much impact on average inflation does this particular sector have? And the largest by far is, again, the food and alcoholic beverages. So very much tied into retail, okay? So second to that, on its own, right here, is fuel and electricity and water, okay? So we know that a significant portion of our inflation comes as a whole. Which part of that is Emira has never been 100% clear to me, because there's as much water, well, there's more electricity usage on average than there is water usage in the country, not accounting for all of the burst mains that we see ever so often. So one could argue that a significant portion of that 17.4% of inflation, or whatever inflation number you tend to see, would be based on the energy charges that we get coming out of Emira on a monthly basis, okay? Part of it also, another significant portion, is the pump. So let's not forget that, although fuel feeds in for the time being into Emira's operations. Everything else is significantly smaller than those two. Now, if you had to take out that sector altogether, you recognize that everything else grows not significantly, but barely, except for food and non-alcoholic beverages. So one could argue that on its own, taking out the effect of energy, that food and non-alcoholic beverages and all of our food, I don't want to say all, but for emphasis, basically all of our food import bill that people like to comment about, that was in the billions of dollars, is a significant source of inflation, because mind you, inflation is mostly, some people say 100%. My argument is it's closer to 80 based on consumer spending habits. 80, so in my view, 80% of our inflation is imported to begin with. So the whole point of this is to show, well, hey, if the 17.4% came out, it wouldn't necessarily be allocated evenly across all of these other categories. In other words, the whole point is, on its own, food and non-alcoholic beverages drives inflation, followed by transport. But herein lies my problem. Don't mind all of these indices, because I'll show you basically the final result of these indices, which speaks to how prices grow. 100 being a base rate, and any rate above that is seen as some growth figure. And of course, for those of you that like economics, the base year for this table, although it has adjustments more recently than not, the base rate base date is July 2001. To me, is neither here or there unless you're looking at the numbers themselves and not trends. And you will see that categorically, food and actually, no, let me not explain it using this table. The graph that comes up next is better. But one of the challenges with this analysis is fairly simple. It does not speak to the fact that how that water and energy are inputs into 1, 2, if this is made here, if it's manufacturing, 3, 4, if this is manufacturing, 5, 6, 7, 8. Literally, this 17.4%, when the central bank and the BSS were designing this, they were thinking, let's try to encapsulate the direct effects. In other words, we know what the bills are. We, however, are not going to take into consideration how the bills that people receive, that businesses receive on a monthly basis, feed in to other people, feed into the other categories. So all of these are taken as if they're separate and distinct, but each of them are linked. The question is, and I have not been able to discover this just yet, somebody must have done the research and I need to find it out. The extent to which this 17.4% is correlated with the others. So my point being is, even if you remove it, to make the following point, that inflation in general, the blue line, which is our general inflation since 2003, and the orange line is our general inflation if you took out electricity charges, for lack of a better term, fuel and light, right? If you took them out, what this is saying is that, okay, on its own, the patterns are the same. In other words, something else must be driving that inflation significantly. And I'm not going to argue that, because as we saw here, food and non-alcoholic beverages on their own, because of the high import bill, tend to drive what we feel every month as part of our cost of living. But I say this really in closing, most of that yellow line still has the effects of any adjustments that would have been made based on electricity bills. The extent to which is, however, unclear to me. But I figure it's still significant given how people interpret their bills and how small businesses, especially those that are highly dependent on current or clean energy costs or efficient energy costs, look at their light bills and make those decisions. But again, at this point, that's highly subjective, but the analysis is due here. In summary, as is proposed, once the clean energy bridge comes along, prices can be contained, especially for the larger ones amongst us. That doesn't come along where it's not there. You should expect increases, but they seem smaller. But again, it'll be good to see how the fuel adjustment charges stay in line. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Jeremy. As our topic suggests, dollars and cents. So we talked a lot about the dollars, lots of figures, lots of economic data. We may need to talk about the cents now, because the truth is, based on a lot of what you shared, I'm really questioning, as I sit here, the practicality of small firms really accessing the grid relative to this renewable energy thrust that everybody's been talking about. So, you know, there are a couple of questions and comments that I would wish for you to weigh in on. If I may begin, and let me just remind our viewers to please post your questions in the chat for this segment of our presentation today. I'm going to begin, Jeremy, with a statement you made. Like, I'm quoting you. You said, generally, Barbados on average is struggling. You know, if I was a journalist, that would be the caption for my story, for my piece. Generally, you know, Barbados on average is struggling, because based on what you said there, the analysis from EMERA's data indicates that they're looking really to the business community to fund this increase. You know, I mean, and the business community is already reeling from the high cost of taxation on the major inputs in their business. As I mentioned, you know, our agribusiness sector is reeling from that sewage levy, that sewage tax. And we already know those who want to trade online, they still have that 2%, you know, foreign exchange tax on online transactions. We were hoping for the discontinuation of the pandemic levy. Nothing was mentioned in Tuesday's budget on that. Is that an indication that it's going to roll over into the next fiscal year? You know,
before you finish, I want to speak to that part in particular. All right, so one of the reasons nobody heard me comment on the budget is because my silence was figuratively bought, meaning that I work with the accounting firms, one of the accounting firms locally, to do their budget analysis, right? And one of the questions I raised in our team meeting is, you know, whether the fact that the Prime Minister did not speak to the pandemic levy, does it mean that the act, we must look at the act, because the act says that it's supposed to finish on the 31st of March, and say, well, hey, we are going with that? Or does the fact that it wasn't spoken to mean that maybe there's going to be some continuance in the future? So that kind of speculation at this point, I imagine, as worrisome. Sorry, but I know I cut you. I just needed to say that before I forgot.
Yeah. And the thing, it is worrisome because something should have been said on Tuesday about that. Is it going to come to an end come March 31st? And the mere fact that nothing was said, I suspect the business community now is going to feel that this thing is going to roll over. So when you say that on average we're struggling, I don't have any comfort in the fact that there were no new taxes. What I was looking for was some reprieve from the existing tax regime for the business community. Because based on your presentation now, two points I want you to weigh in on. One, the fact that EMERA is looking to the business community really for the bulk of this increase. $16 on average, based on your analysis, $16 on average will now be applied to the electricity bill for the average small business, right? $16 on average.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's one. And then two, you're saying that well, if we're able to really join this renewable energy thrust and be able to sell back to the grid, but then that may see a reduction for, you know, the average small business. But again, if you follow the recent estimates debate, those who were in the well of Parliament from the Ministry of Energy in essence confirmed that there's really no more room. And therefore, all of the anticipation that we had relative to investing in the panels and, you know, then being able to sell back to the grid. All of this anticipation may very well, have been a bit premature, because now we're seeing that the opportunities are not there. So I want you to weigh in on those two thoughts, and then we're going to go to our questions. I have several questions coming in from our colleagues in the chat, and I'm going to read them out to you if you're not able to see them, because they see that some are being sent to everyone. So if you can, weigh in on these after, and let's have a robust discussion, if you will.
Right. All right, well, all right. So Barbados is struggling on the fact that, again, is lacking growth. What we are seeing right now in terms of this boom in tourism is a recovery. It looks great because the last 2 to 3 years, it was really bad. And the numbers would suggest that there was some great growth. But at the end of the day, up to 2010, Barbados was a $8 billion, $8.5 billion economy, and has never really gone past that, outside of some numbers being revalued, because there's a call to revalue GDP. The Prime Minister even mentioned that in the budget speech, to revalue GDP, because they suspect that the economy is much larger than the numbers are suggesting. Even then, it can't be that significant, especially that. So the problem generally is growth. Now, I'm one that would say very upfront that the issues at hand outside of growth are this: wage adjustment in general and cost adjustment by businesses very well go hand in hand when there's general growth. So the problem is, where do you find that large sense of growth from? And as you saw with the GDP figures, let me just go back a bit. Oops, just came out. I need to share it again. Stand by. Share screen. Yeah. Right. Need to go back. Right. So in terms of the economy, I mean, look at the amount of negative numbers we have in there. Don't look at anything under FISM. Right? These are just GDP tables, but in general, for the last 10 years, on average, the economy had a lot of downward pressure. So anytime you feel as though there's a cost adjustment, customers would feel it, not customers, people in society will feel it in general, regardless. Because you have on one end taxes, which hardly ever shift downwards, if any. We were all somewhat, well, some people were looking for some bit of a reprieve. I was looking in the opposite direction, because typically with a wage increase in this environment, you tend to have something being taken from one hand, right? The other. So, some kind of tax is introduced or some kind of adjustment upwards is introduced. But I guess I'm not going to say that the Prime Minister buried herself in the sand, but burying your head in the sand also is the same as giving with one and taking away with the other, in terms of not changing your environment. And really and truly, there's not much to be too happy about if you look at these growth rates. I don't care about the size, I care about trends. And as I explained, the best growing or best performing industry in Barbados by way of growth was one of the smallest, mining and quarrying. And that's tied into construction. So like, in general, my issue is that, in terms of adding this new cost adjustment, it is, I guess, rigor du jour. Everybody's trying to ensure that they're able to collect just enough so they can invest. Now, one could argue that when there was good times and the evidence that came out about, mismanagement of investment, if one wants to call it that, where huge dividends were being paid out and we are now paying for that. That's another part of parcel of some of the mistakes that the business sector and the government tends to make, not saving up for that rainy day, or, in anticipation of a rainy day, making the best choices you can for that rainy day. It's just, I'm not even going to say it's cultural, that's global. Silicon Valley Bank did the same thing, and that's a huge bank, global bank, right? So I'm not saying or picking on any Barbadians in that regard. So, at the end of the time, it's unsettling, but again, to its credit, Like Empower did say that once the clean energy proposal, once the clean energy facility comes through, the bridge, that, especially given that it's been commissioned already, just to be frank on that, that you shouldn't feel this increase. This increase probably ties them over until they can switch to a cheaper source of energy entirely. And the customer in the medium term, I hope not the long term, can then start to see, well, hey, I don't really feel that much of a squeeze as I did in the earlier stages, if you see where I'm coming from. So a lot of it comes down to believing whether the commissioning of that project results in the savings that, like the boss says it does, and in the time that it's supposed to do so. Until then, there's that squeeze, and you at least have an idea based on Emira's own admission as the sole monopoly in utility, how much is going to cost.
Mhm.
I hope I
And
answered
that time frame, Jeremy, did not take into account what is going on now globally. I mean, the war in Ukraine, I suspect, may very well influence now the practicality of that time frame.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of sourcing raw materials,
and batteries, I mean, we're having a challenge with batteries now too, I understand.
Oh yeah, but it's so funny. So my new path in aviation allows me to know certain trade routes. And in terms of sourcing the material directly out of Africa and elsewhere, certain parts of Asia, having them shipped here via China, that's not disrupted. What's disrupted is wherever Ukraine was, or whatever they were providing significantly to the global market. So certain food stuff and certain very, very few precious metals, which would obviously go into that productive process with solar panels and batteries. But, for the time being, you're more worried about how the war in Ukraine affects logistics in terms of the cost and just general logistics. Right? That to me is the main worry as opposed to supply just yet. Not too worried about supply. I'm worried about how expensive it is to get the stuff here to begin with, because they're trying to, as logistical persons, cover their losses with respect to losing access to Ukraine and also losing access through and over Ukraine. No planes can pass over Ukraine right now. And this has been the case. So anything that has to be delivered rapidly would obviously be affected, especially out of Asia. Anything that has to go through the seas near there, Mediterranean, out to the Baltics, not the Baltics, sorry, out of forgetting the name of that sea up there by Ukraine. Could look, but that's mute. But anything that has to go through that shipping route to say the Caribbean will be affected. Anything that could avoid there to begin with will not, but still these guys would want to, just like Emira, cover their general operating costs. So yes, I believe that a lot is left to be desired, especially with the commissioning of the Clean Energy Bridge. And, I would say as small business people and for myself, because I didn't pay enough attention on it until I was corrected, right? And I'm honest about these things. So the fact remains that a lot of the reprieve that we would want has to very well be, what's the best word? Very well assuming that the Clean Energy Bridge is on time in terms of the full completion of it. And that's the main issue.
Let's go to the chat because there's some questions here I want you to weigh in on, and some very good questions.
Yeah.
Let's start with the bottom and come up. I see A Swift. Barbados has not rebounded back to pre-pandemic levels compared to other islands based on recent numbers. And we saw that, especially with the tourism numbers. We're seeing Grenada and others doing very, very, a lot better than us, at least, when you look at the actual numbers. So what else do we need to do? Where will the revenue come from? Because we're talking about growth, and I'm hearing you, and we had a presentation with Professor Robinson, similarly making the point that we are just not growing as a country. So, where else can the revenue come from? He's asking, and I'm agreeing that it's a good question.
No, it's a very good question. I find that in forums like this, I would say something, and then years later, I hear it in Parliament, right? So let's hope that the emphasis continues. So look, to be blunt, the main opportunities still revolve in tourism, but it's where we're getting tourists from. It is still the early days yet, and I'm talking about main short-term opportunities. It is still early days with respect to the government actually following through on that Middle East thing. I made myself known on the national scene by saying that we should concentrate our tourism efforts in the Middle East. Still early days, and it's tied into investment. Some of the wealthiest tourists and some of the most well-traveled tourists are from Asia and the Middle East. I am not a fan, despite speaking the language Portuguese, of having tourism efforts in South America, particularly Brazil. Anything Barbados could offer, but Brazil has it in droves, in droves. So I really don't, and most Brazilians, because I think we expect that millions of them might want to come here. Well, millions of them just don't speak Portuguese. Sorry, English. They just don't. You're more likely to find an English speaker in the Spanish speaking countries than in Brazil, for sure. That's way learned Portuguese. It was that lost over there when they first went. So suffice to say that it comes down to where we target and where we persist. I am a fan for cutting and cutting hard, which isn't necessarily the way politics works. So I would have reduced my marketing efforts in the UK. What more brand equity can we have in the UK? If you tell me Europe, fine. Europeans don't spend as much as the British do on vacations, however, as the statistics state. Canadians definitely don't as well too, but there's brand equity there. And the Americans really and truly, as far as they prefer price competitive destinations. We can't beat out Aruba nor St. Lucia as it stands right now, based on our wage levels. So in the Middle East, anywhere that has that focuses on high value tourism and spend, you know, China, rich Vietnamese, rich Indonesians, although we're a Christian society and they're Muslim, and definitely the Chinese, great. And most of the Middle East, great as well. I think that helps in the short term once the revenue starts to turn. But in terms of Barbados' long-term viability, I was saying it for years, the Prime Minister definitely agrees with it, is the whole idea of turning Barbados into logistics hub. That helps tourism. I mean, where we are positioned is extremely unique. And even in the age of AI, where you would find in probably 20 to 30 years more autonomously flown vehicles, it doesn't get rid of our competitive advantage. Our location is probably the prime competitive advantage we have even over people. If everybody in Barbados had to leave today that was well-educated, and a bunch of, let's say, not as well-educated people on average came and settled in Barbados, the businesses that they would start would take advantage of our location, first and foremost. That's the easiest way to go about it, outside of retail and whatnot local, okay? So those are the two prime growth areas, which ties into other industries like sciences. We can compete on location and tax jurisdiction there. I like life sciences. I was very big on the medicinal cannabis train. I've seen how, because I just did a flight to Antigua the other day, I've seen how that has taken off to an extent in Antigua locally for all the wrong reasons, really. Just people coming and smoking, but in Jolly Bay and in St. John's. But nonetheless, there are areas, it's just a matter of how quickly one can exploit. And sadly, most of the areas I highlighted are capital intensive, which would mean that for small business persons, you either got to find some way to be an appendix to it, or not appendix, but, you know, attach yourself to the side of it, offer support businesses to that new growth industry to enjoy that growth when it does come. Just because the capital requirements to be involved. One would think larger entrepreneurs should lead it. And that's fine. Last but not least, another very big growth area, I'm glad the government is laying this out. Another thing I've been talking about for years is having that link with Guyana. I tell people this all the time. Like, if I were in my 20s right now, and I did this in my 20s, so I could tell you this for a fact, Guyana would be one of my focal points for growth. Yes, structurally, there's a lot of issues. Politically, there's a lot of issues still. But when you have a natural resource of the type and size that they have, there's a lot of support industries that will come in and support during the click phase and when it settles. So there's some level of sustainability towards growth in Guyana that you won't necessarily see in the next 10 years in Barbados. So read my lips. Next 10 years, Guyana will face us in every way in terms of opportunity. If you can take a cut in salary and you want to work, you can go there. If your business is involved in raw materials or in terms of manufacturing, my thinking always is set the plant up in Guyana, redistribute from Guyana, or as the Prime Minister, I would hope, reduces any more into regional levies as the time comes, in line with the Treaty of Chagrabas. You know, you do transshipments from Guyana up to Barbados and elsewhere if you want to for high value clients. So creativity as well with what is there can lead to growth. And I honestly think most of those opportunities are 3 to 5 year opportunities that will start to see through. And it's just about positioning. You don't want to be, well, most people like that frontier persons go out there and fail first, and then you learn lessons from those who fail and you succeed. I understand most business people in Barbados think that way, but sadly, we are at that precipice where most of what we're doing just is not working. Yeah. So it's about positioning for the next phase of growth. We will have it. I mean, I've never not said in my old office as the president of the BES and stuff, I've never not said that Barbados can't grow. My only issue has always been either people wait too long for government to take that chance and take that risk. And I understand capital is tight, but some investment is worth it. You know, some investment is definitely worth it in terms of risking it. And I honestly think that there are opportunities, especially with AI coming as a threat and a promise. Sorry, I was wrong.
Let's get to some of the other questions. Glad to hear your thoughts on where you think the growth can come from. Just bear in mind that I mean, I think you said it at the end. Some of these proposals are capital intensive, and small firms don't have that capital, so they have to look to be a part of the value chain in some way. And even, you know, you talked about cannabis earlier, but even that we're seeing now that the financial providers are not supporting the cannabis industry.
You wouldn't,
you know, so that is the question is that dead in the water? Because the commercial banks and by extension the credit unions and so on, you know, are not financing the development of the cannabis industry, because the correspondent banks, primarily in Canada, US, and so on, are not in favor of financing that sector. So is that dead in the water? Rhetorical, don't respond, but you know, that's food for thought. Roger's asking, is GDP calculated on the calendar year or the fiscal year?
It shouldn't really matter, but in most these calculations are on the calendar year. Yeah. But
most the calendar year. I thought it would have been the fiscal year. No?
That's calendar year.
Doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter in the end, you know, because a year is a year regardless of when you started. It's just a case of where you're starting and ending points are. I mean, right. if I said, look, there are GDP calculations by fiscal year as well too. They're there, but most of them are calendar year, and it makes sense. Well, sorry, it doesn't really in Barbados make sense, especially given the fiscal year ends end of March. And all right, let me put this with you. As an economist, I expect GDP to grow from, in terms of calendar year, January to March grows somewhat, but more in a stable region. From April to July, there's a decline. From July to August, say early September, there's a bump because people like Lynette won't keep off the road and drinking drinks, right? And then there was a big tune. That was a big tune too. But nonetheless, from September to November, a low. November to December, a pickup. If you change it to fiscal year, it starts at this. The year opens with a low to July, July, August, September, there's a pickup. September-ish, late September, October into November, there's a lull. December into the end of the fiscal year, November, December into the end of the fiscal year, March, there's a pickup. It only changes how you interpret seasonality, but it doesn't necessarily tell you, you know, it doesn't change dramatically how the country grows overall as years go by. So you can find them as fiscal, you can find them as annual if you want.
Right. Okay. But Angela has a couple of queries you need to weigh in on. Is the mayor's request reasonable or unreasonable at this point of time from an economist standpoint? That's one. And a follow on to that, um, Jeremy, has to do with, the fact that we're recommending the use of solar panels on roofs on our homes and buildings, our businesses, and so on going forward. But the question is this really a good recommendation, and will homes, businesses, and so on benefit from it or not? Especially given what we heard recently about there being no more room, it would appear, on the grid.
Well, that's a legal issue. I honestly believe I'm one of the proponents for persons coming off the grid.
Coming off the grid?
Yeah, I think it has dire negative economic impacts, but the social side of me actually prefers it. Just given the risk, the headline risk. If we get a Cat 3 or Cat 4 in the mirror, like I lived through Dominica in terms of that hurricane in 2017. I saw how long it took for the average person to be able to light something at night or cook their own food reasonably. If you had a generator, you're good. Otherwise, it sucks off. And it really taught me that energy independence at some level is good for continuance in bad times, continuance of economic activity. But the financial, because of the laws, you must feed into the grid at some point. There's some persons I see that somehow are able to stay off the grid. I don't know how they're able to do it without any complaints, but they are doing it. Fine. I leave them to their own thing. But for the most part, you're supposed to, or you're encouraged to feed into the grid. Now, as of May last year, anybody that came after the payback period was extended past 7 years, right? In terms of the rate now that you're being given to feed into the grid. That I know for a fact because I was looking at putting something on my parents' house. And my timing was off. So, it really came down to managing whatever use of electricity that you have, as opposed to putting cash on the table and saying, let's put this in here and use it indiscriminately. The cost literally made no difference based on the reward, right? So if you're an early user, or if you're able to legally, again, this is a legality thing and I cannot advise strongly on this, you're able to divvy up your electricity or share whatever returns you get from the grid, whatever credits you get from the grid with others in the association, so be it. Like, I mean, Sagicor has created an investment facility that is looking to do stuff like that, feed into the grid and, you share your credits with your investors. You liquidate those credits, they have a cash pool there, and your investors get cash in hand for any bit of credit that you would have given to feed into the grid. So long being short, it is becoming more difficult for smaller persons to sustainably feed into the grid, as far as I'm concerned. The first question you had asked, I started to forget about, and that was
right. Yes, she was asking. Angela was asking if you, from an economist perspective, if you really think that timing for this rate increase by mirror is really reasonable.
If I look at the numbers, all right, there's two aspects. If I went into it by knowing that there was, or suspecting there was mismanagement of funds and investment on the part of the mirror, extracting a lot of wealth via dividends as opposed to upgrading stock and capital, upgrading equipment, then I would say no, it is not reasonable. That's a decision that you made in light of just bad corporate governance, let's put it that way. Or say corporate governance that just isn't fitting of the occasion. I can't say it bad, because maybe their strategy is always to extract high dividends into the company and not wait for capital appreciation. And if you look at the financials, given that there's hardly any growth, I can understand why they were doing dividends. There wasn't much to leave your cash in for at 3%. No, a 3% growth per annum in terms of return. But from that point of view, I think is unreasonable. If I was to speak to just the fact that it seems though that we are paying for that corporate governance issue. If I were to look at the numbers alone without having insight into that corporate governance issue, I would say that it's not untimely per se. It is expensive, but not untimely, because that rate is going to be locked in. For me, the massive inflation definitely could happen next year, right? Like inflation for me hasn't even near peaked yet, because looking at what Jerome Powell and them are doing in the States, looking at the fact that Putin seems as if he's going to intensify, looking at the, I want to say, passive aggressive moves that China is making with respect to its own military, I expect some kind of larger conflict in the near future. As a result, I expect even larger inflation. If we could lock them into this rate, especially with a clean energy bridge, I'd rather it now from an economics point of view than later, particularly if we get the clean energy bridge going on quickly. And Christopher also said very much matter of factly, you can go off grid and completely separate him. That option, I will admit, again, I'm not a legal person, but I was never clear on if that route was encouraged or supported. I knew, for instance, that Emira was fighting it for a while, especially when I started to do something, or was looking into doing something myself. But the option of separating is much better than it was 10 years ago. The ultimate worries are battery replacement costs. And I mean, yes, the batteries have gotten better, and I hear the replacement times on those are 7 years now. So every 7 years you need to swap out. Tesla is providing very good batteries, but for most people, that option to go totally off the grid is not attainable at all, especially with if you're a small business person with limited access to capital, especially from the banks, to fund anything outside of your operations. So I didn't necessarily want to speak on that, neither, just based on the audience. I bet most people here will not be able to afford that, or at least find a bank that would be willing to afford that option. We're talking a lot of wattage that you need to fund your household for sure nowadays, especially for family households. So I don't know if it's attainable, but definitely going on the grid is not as beneficial as it used to be.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you said that, because Christopher is here making the point that there's the route really of going off the grid and completely separating from BL&P. But you're suggesting that that's practical if you have the capital outlay for it.
Yeah. That's easily, like, again, I was looking at that option for my parents, and that was at 50 grand. That was at 50K, and yeah, that was about 50K, but albeit my parents, you know, where they live, they have reason to use more energy as to other people than an average person over 60. I would say that. Not saying they're wealthier, but just given the lifestyle and what they do in retirement, it would make sense for them to use more, right? But definitely, I remember being quoted, and this was from the BNOC, believe it or not. They offer panels. They used to have a program where, and just to show you that feeding into the grid, it's not making as much sense as it did before. They used to rent space from you and start to feed into the grid, and then you would split the credits. That was a strategy the BNOC had, and then they stopped that about a year and a half ago. And when they quoted me, because I got quotes on another property that I got so from them, that was the arrangement. And then, yeah, for what my parents needed in terms of their usage, it was about 50K. And I know a lot of people don't have 50K to put aside just today for that, where there's employees to pay and materials to buy, and that's the problem.
Mm-hmm. But, you know, while we wrap up our conversation here today, Jeremy, the thing is that we're expecting an increase for this utility from, you know, whenever the FTC gives you the go ahead. So we expected an increase. However, there's been the push to move towards developing a renewable energy sector. And we had a number of our financial providers, commercial banks, credit unions, and so on, you know, coming on board and say, yes, they're going to provide the capital for this level of investment. And so we began to hear a lot about green loans and, you know, all of the financial institutions started now developing some product that businesses and individuals, for that matter, can access. And then on top of that, now you're hearing, well, we don't have any more room, so this may not even work now. So those who developed the green loans and were encouraging business owners and householders to come forward to access may not now even have the opportunity to be able to access this grid, because we heard, as I said, from the Ministry of Energy's officials in the recent estimates presentation, that there's no more room. So it's a catch-22 now at this point. And this is why I suspect the point has been made by Christopher that we may need to go off the grid and try to operate outside of the Barbados Light and Power, if at all possible. But anyhow, I tell you that we're here looking for these new areas of industry to maybe provide some diversification of our economy. We're still coming up against stumbling blocks, Jeremy. This is what I'm saying. We're still coming up against stumbling blocks for our business community, really.
I agree. Christopher made a point there about taking a three bedroom, 2-bathroom, 2-story house, 3-bedroom, 2-story house off the grid for 24 grand, right? Now that's why we're speaking to my parents on an example. I don't know what that family uses. I know where my parents occupy. It's definitely larger than a 3-bedroom, 2-bedroom. So I was going on. And then also the fact that the land is like 3/4 of an acre that they live on. That was their big retirement savings plan, right? And to take care of that, to do the watering and the stuff that my man wants to do on his land, needed way more than a $24,000 investment, especially given the amount of energy that they're using. But I do take the point that maybe some people overprice the off-grid systems. I don't know what our OI Christopher was looking at with respect to his own projects. I'm not here to tell him how to price the project, and I'm not here to even condemn the BNOC or how they price their project. But long story being short, 24K, depending on the size of business, is still a sizable investment as well too. Especially if you're not getting any financing, to speak to the green loan section. I mean, look, the way the government is going about it, if they're consistent, could be helpful. I am aware of a few efforts being made by USAID. Very soon, very soon, what's the word now? The USAID is going to put out, well, they put out for tender at least 2 projects I'm aware of where it could result in upwards of $5 million to about $20 million coming back into the Barbados economy to support green initiatives like this, right? And that is over a 5-year period starting, I think, middle of this year to middle 5 years from now. So, I mean, as long as I see more institutional support, even outside of the private sector coming in and helping in this way, it could make it easier to enter into this kind of thing in terms of providing to the grid. I see Rick is saying that the Light and Power is asking investors with systems beyond a certain size to add batteries, and it makes the projects more significantly expensive, but the only other option is to get in there to invest in batteries, which requires additional investment on the company's behalf. So like, long and short of it is like, it's just costly. For me, going off the grid once you got the capital is a better choice. If you don't, it is a real tight position to be in. Again, your constituents, Lynette, range from people that are making close to the $8 million cutoff point, right? And those making hundreds of thousands of dollars in gross revenue and probably have staff. And those persons I'm talking about right now. The 24,000 is not something that's attainable, and then even getting access to loans of that size from the commercial banks made little sense. So it's like between a rock and a hard place, and for me, it's just about ensuring that the SBA becomes part of that conversation of where the likes of a USAID and the IADB as they're trying to fund more green projects and new projects. And they're funding, they're bringing money behind it, and they're looking at even if the government wants to issue a blue bond so it can redirect towards small businesses that are in that area in a green bond so that you only have that government cover and the government can redirect the funds. I think that's the best way forward for constituents like yourself. And then maybe the SBA even doing a program, it may cost a little more, where you could put something and everybody can share off the credits and offset against their own particular energy costs. That might be a project that's worth doing, just given the size of the constituents within the SBA. I think a fund like that could be a starter in terms of saving and helping the credits. The only problem is to get cash out of the credits, but helping those credits be offset against like those, I guess.
Yeah.
That's one of the only ways I can think about it.
Thank you very much. We're out of time. Jeremy, we've had a very good conversation. We've been talking the dollars, but we've been talking the cents too. SENSE, and not CENTS, right? We've been talking the sense about this whole development as well as the financial and economic implications of it. So I really want to thank you. It's been a very, 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 very good conversation. Colleagues, I wanted to remind you that in the event that you miss any aspect of it, don't fear. The session has been recorded, and in a couple of days, we will have this ready and uploaded on our YouTube channel and streamed through our website. So I just want to put in a plug that if you have not yet done so, please subscribe to the SBA's YouTube channel. That you can go back and you can watch this in any of our webinars for that matter. And also on our website via the SBA TV segment, this presentation will be featured. So even that you miss any aspect, don't worry. Give us a couple of days to just complete the editing and so on, and we'll have it up and ready for you to review again. But we want to thank you so much for spending the time with us. We've gone over our time. We've actually gone over to an hour and a half, but it was a very interesting, very fruitful conversation, just the beginning of it for us really as we seek to navigate this year, 2023. It really started off, very challenging one. That's why I picked out on that phrase that our presenter made, that generally Barbados on average is struggling. And so in having these sessions, we're looking really for solutions and for some answers, how we can navigate the months and the years ahead as we seek to do business and do business better. Look out, colleagues, for the next webinar in the month of April. Next month, we're gonna be looking at tax compliance. This is a tax season, so we're gonna bring our tax clinic to you in the month of April. So you can look out for that, because we want to make sure that our firms, our constituents, as much as it is practical, maintain their tax compliance. So you can look out for that session. Again, please go to the chat now and you'll see the feedback form. Please click on it, click on the link, and share your thoughts. 5 to 7 minutes or thereabout. Give us some feedback on today's session, because this helps us as we continue to improve for you, our members and our constituents. So we want to thank this afternoon Jeremy Stephen, noted economist. He shared some very, very good insights, even what he considers to be some of the growth sectors, the new areas of economic activity that we can pursue as a country as we go forward and as we look to reposition. Coming on the heels of Professor Robinson, who again shared lots of data that showed us that we're really not growing, and we have not been for a little while now. We're really, encouraging us to have the national conversation. What really do we need to do in order to really reposition and to grow? Because growth obviously will benefit all of us, our businesses, our families, our communities, our country, by extension. And therefore, this has to engage our attention at this time. What do we really need to do to grow as an economy and as a country? So, look out for that. If you've not seen that presentation, please go back and watch it. Very, very good information again shared on this topic. So we thank you very much, Jeremy, again, for coming and being a part of our webinar series. And thank you to members and constituents alike, colleagues and friends of the association, for sharing some of your Thursday with us. And look out for the next session, as I said, in the month of April. So please click on the link, give us your thoughts and our feedback tool, and do continue to have a good day. God bless you all. See you on the next occasion. Bye-bye for now.